Welcome back to the whole nine yards, guys. Drew PN here with Brandon Kokorian. It's been a little bit. So, Brandon, how's it going?
Yeah, has been a while. It's good though. Nothing's changed. Nothing to complain about. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Stuff's going pretty well. Summers and full swing and all that. But I guess NBA wise, these NBA playoffs have been crazy and super unpredictable. But I guess somehow Brandon was able to predict the conference finals series both perfectly. Brandon, what's the reaction on Suns versus Bucks in game ones tonight?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the weirder finals we've had between just the two teams. I think there was like somewhat of a stat. I think it was like um, since like the 70s, it hasn't been like two teams that have gone this long without a championship, I think it was. And obviously the Bucks won in like 71. The Suns have never won. But just think about all these last 40 years or whatever. There's always been one team that at least been like a staple, like a Lakers, a Warriors, or recently a Spurs, obviously the Bulls. So it's kind of weird to have a finals like this. And we knew it was going to be like this when we got to the conference finals because you're rather have the Hawks, the Bucks, Suns, or Clippers. So it's going to be a weird finals no matter what. But I think now that it is set, it definitely is. And after tonight's game one, will really be it's really the Suns versus the Bucks, and we'll get into obviously Giannis not playing, which obviously takes it down a step. It'd be I think a lot more exciting if he was playing, but he's at least not playing game one. We'll see about the other games, but definitely a weird finals. Something that I don't think anyone probably predicted going into the season. Definitely not. Maybe the Bucks, but definitely not the Suns. So it's going to be a weird finals, but hopefully it'll be exciting. All you can really ask for a finals is that it's at least 6 or 7 games, and that every game is back and forth, or there's at least crazy shots, crazy moments. So hopefully that does happen because that always makes finals better. So as long as that happens, I'm honestly okay with it. And for predicting the two teams, just quickly, it just actually we'll get into that after. I guess what are your thoughts on the finals and kind of the matchup between the two teams?
My initial thoughts, and I kind of talked about it a little bit on the Clips channel, like 5 days ago or something. But I feel like, I don't even feel like it's a fact pretty much that the Suns and the Bucks are only in the finals because of injuries, and I'm gonna say I'm not trying to take anything away from the teams, although I guess I almost am. But Milwaukee wouldn't be in the finals if the Nets were healthy, and the Suns probably aren't in the finals if the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Clippers are healthy. Not that they would necessarily have lost to the Nuggets in that series, but it would have been at least more competitive. They would have been more tired in the conference finals by not having the semifinals be a sweep. I don't think they beat the Clippers if the Clippers have Kawhi, and I don't think they beat the Lakers if the Lakers are fully healthy. And I know that is kind of saying a lot because almost all the teams have been hurt, and even the Suns have been hurt to a certain extent. With Chris Paul's talking about how he was dealing with injuries right after they won the conference finals, and obviously he had that shoulder injury and COVID, and so yeah. But I think it's just a reality, and it'll still be interesting to see the series, but I don't know I don't even know necessarily what it means, but I just think it's interesting to note. That's kind of my initial reaction.
Yeah, and I think there's two big storylines through this finals. You're always looking for a storyline in every finals, and there's one on each side. But I think obviously one's bigger than the other, just because the other guy is injured right now. So Chris Paul's storyline, obviously, if he gets a championship, what that means for his legacy. And we're not the biggest Chris Paul fans, but I think we could both agree if he does win, just get at least one championship. I think it does. I don't know if again, we could probably go through our top 5 point guard list, but I think it if it doesn't put him at 5, I think he's right at 6, and he has a really strong case to be at 5, maybe even 4. You could also look at that. But that's the biggest storyline on the Sun side, and then for the Buck side, it's obviously Giannis. He's 26 years old. I think MJ got his first at 27. I think LeBron was 27. Steph was 28. So it would put him in front of those guys, which it's just crazy to think that he could have a championship before those guys. Now, obviously, he's injured, and we'll see how much he even plays. Maybe he doesn't even play at all, which I'd be surprised about. He's probably going to play hurt if he does come back. But if he does win one, that definitely leaps him into the early stages of being one of those top guys at the end of his career. When you look back on all the players, he'll be somewhat close to that if he gets one at 26, because obviously you'd think he'd get at least one or two more. At least you'd hope, in the next 7 years of his, still prime at that point. So I think those are the two biggest storylines. I don't know if you have another storyline, but I would say those are the two biggest storylines, and obviously it's one for each side.
Yeah, no, those are probably my same storylines. I mean, the Chris Paul thing is, to me, is by far the biggest storyline, at least for me, especially as somebody who has been pretty vocal about just not being a huge fan of Chris Paul. And so, yeah, if they do win this championship, for me, he's a top 5 point guard of all time. And I'm not going to necessarily compare him to like a John Stockton and people that I just never really got to watch, but at least he's a top point guard of all the point guards I've watched. So the only one that's better off the top of my head that I've actually gotten the chance to watch has pretty much only Steph Curry, really, at least that I can think of. Like, I never got to really watch Steve Nash or anything, so I can't really compare Nash's prime to Paul. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes. If he has to win this finals, though, to me, like if he loses this finals, it's not. I mean, it's not bad for his legacy, but I feel like he really needs this. He really needs this to be like a top 5 point guard of all time, to be a guy who, not only can everybody say like, oh, he was a leader, he did this, he did that, but he actually has the winning to back it up. To me, it's always been a bit foolish when people talk about Chris Paul's winning culture and all that. And it's not like he doesn't bring a winning culture with him, and he's a good leader, but it's tough to say all that and then at the end of the day be like, oh, by the way, he doesn't have any championships and he only made the finals once, when literally the whole league was injured. And
Yeah.
if he doesn't beat this Bucks team, where Giannis is probably going to miss the first 2 games, and if he comes back for the third, it's probably not at 100%. Maybe he comes back for game 2, but I doubt it. Then that means he probably didn't play well, and I think he can definitely play well enough to. He should play well enough to win these finals and probably be the finals MVP.
Yeah, and I think if they win this finals, he will be the finals MVP, because I think he's the reason why they'd win. Booker can always go for like 25 to 30 points, but he's not making too much of an impact on the game to the point that Chris Paul would make. Obviously, with his passing, leadership, I think he does have a really good leadership quality. He can score when he like really has to in clutch situations. He is pretty good at doing that. So I think if they do win, it is because of him. But honestly, even without Giannis, I do like the Bucks in this series, and I guess we'll get more into it, just a little bit later in the episode. But I think they match up really well with the Suns compared to the last couple teams that have played them. Really more so just the Clippers, because they didn't have a center who could stay on the floor with Ayton, while the Bucks do and Brook Lopez. But that's for kind of the future. That's for the later in the episode when we'll get more into the finals. But I guess just quickly on the conference finals, we'll start with the Western Conference Finals, only because I think it was a little bit. I think it definitely could have been different. Obviously, if Kawhi played, I think definitely different. I think the Clippers win that series if Kawhi does play that entire series, and that's kind of why I made my prediction of Suns in 6 before, because it just didn't seem like he was going to play. It didn't really seem like he had any intentions of playing, honestly. I think there was some miscommunication between him and the team. So I don't really know what that whole situation was. We still don't even really know what the injury was. We just know it was a knee injury, but they were saying ACL, then they were saying just like a twisted knee, then a bruised knee. Like, I don't even really know what it was. Clearly kept him out for, 2+ weeks or whatever it was. But it was a great series. That game 6 was a great game. That was Chris Paul's best game of his career. No doubt. I mean, he had 40 points or 41 points or whatever it was. He had like 26 in the second half, or like 30 points in the second half, whatever it was. It was, a 20-point game, but if he doesn't have that performance, the Clippers definitely have a shot at winning that game. And then game 7, when you're down 3-1, I like the Clippers in that game. So just a great performance from him. And just one other person I want to give credit to is Paul George. I think he proved a lot of people wrong this playoffs. When Kawhi went down, you're probably thinking they're losing to the Jazz in the second round. They win that series, and then he plays really well in the Sun series when he played the most minutes by like 100+ minutes, took the most shots, he had like the most rebounds, most assists, whatever it was, like throughout the entire playoffs. He was basically top 3 in every single statistical category. So I just want to give credit to him. But again, that was a great game 6 from Chris Paul.
Yeah, no, I would agree on the Chris Paul point. Even though that was at the end of the game, it was a big lead, but there were a few stretches there where the Clippers made it close. There was a point at which they brought it down to like 10 points after the Suns had gotten out to a big lead, but Chris Paul quickly put that to rest. And there was the Suns were on a run at some point, and but Chris Paul hit like, so I think it was a 4-point play, and that kind of put that run at a halt. And yeah, I mean, it was a great series by the Suns, and credit to the Suns in that series. Paul George, yeah, I would agree. I think he proves a lot of his haters wrong. I don't know that he didn't really prove anything to me necessarily that I didn't already think of him, I guess. I don't know if this is just me not looking back at our old videos and looking at my old takes on Paul George, but I've always felt like he's pretty much been a number 2 on a championship winning team. And I think I probably was higher on him than most people outside of this podcast. So I don't know that he proved anything to me. He's a guy that isn't a ball dominant guy, and I feel like we kind of saw that in the Sun series, that he's not, even with Kawhi out, he's not a guy that's gonna just like, he's not bringing the ball up every possession. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying everybody thought that or anything. It's just, yeah, I don't know. If Kawhi plays though, that would have been a much more interesting series to watch for me, because it was a bummer, and it's been a bummer the whole playoffs, just not having people healthy. And I mean, the last half of that Eastern Conference Finals, where it's like, I mean, it's really just the Hawks minus Trae Young versus the Bucks minus Giannis, and it's like, they don't have the guys who brought them to this spot, which is unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can move to the Eastern Conference Finals now, but it definitely wasn't what I think any of us were expecting with those last, 3 games without basically anyone. And I know Trae Young played in that last game, but it's not like he really did. I mean, clearly he was not even close to 100%. I think he was 4-17 from the field. He just wasn't even close to what he was, before in the playoffs and even just earlier in that series. But it was still a really good series. I think it showed a lot for the Bucks, honestly. I mean, I know they won, but Middleton played really well. Drew Holiday played really well. Brook Lopez played really well. So if those guys can continue to play like that, and it's tough to say that because they're very inconsistent, especially Middleton and Holiday, where you kind of need them to put up 20+ points a night, and it just seems like a lot of nights they just don't. Whether it's because they're just missing a lot of shots, they're not taking a lot of shots. That's more in Holiday's case than Middleton's, but they played really well in this series, especially Middleton. If Giannis can come back and at least be 80%, which I honestly doubt, but if he somehow can be 80%, hopefully in game 3, because I kind of agree with you. I think he'll miss. It's already been, he's already out for game 1, but he'll probably miss game 2 also. So if he can come back and then Middleton can continue to play like that, I really like their chances even more than I already do without Giannis. So just some really good play from them. Coach Bud, I thought he had a good series. I don't think he could have really I don't think he could have made any faults. So I guess maybe that's the only thing you could say. I don't think he could have ever like messed up with anything, just because of the way the matchups worked out. And then obviously when you lose Giannis, you're kind of just hoping that other players can step up for you. But I just thought it was a good series for the Bucks. I thought it showed a lot for them going into a finals. And especially from Middleton, Holiday, and Lopez, where if they can continue to play like that, again, I really like their chances then.
Yeah, I think Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday are the keys to the series, and that goes without saying, without Giannis for probably the first 2 or 3 games. They can't afford to be inconsistent like they've been in pretty much every series, even though Middleton and Holiday did have a good conference finals. I mean, they can't really afford to come out game 1 of the finals and have 15 points each on 35% from the field. Like they're gonna lose. And if they lose this game 1 horribly and they kind of lose momentum, and the Suns have all the momentum and you have all the narrative and all the fans kind of backing the Suns up, I'm pretty sure 80% of the country is probably rooting for the Suns in this series if they had to pick. just because Chris Paul, this is his first finals and it's his 16th year, and just the storylines. And I think Devin Booker is also kind of a fan favorite, I would probably say. So they need to at least be competitive game one. I want to see some spurts where they're just looking like a solid team. And Brook Lopez is a guy who, without Giannis, can kind of be in the paint a little bit more than he probably could be with Giannis playing. Uh, so they almost play a little bit different without Giannis. I mean, that goes also without saying, but yeah, as far as Eastern Conference Finals specifically, yeah, I don't think Coach Bud could have really done it much to cost in that series. I mean, it's not like it went 7 games. I mean, it did go 6, but I would agree with you on that. I mean, hats off obviously to the Hawks. I mean, just the fact that they even got to the conference finals was, I literally wasn't even thinking about that when I was predicting my Eastern Conference bracket, I guess if you want to call it that. I just never would have thought the Hawks would have made it here. And I mean, I took the Knicks in round one, but I didn't really, I didn't put too much thought into it necessarily. Um, I just figured whoever won that series would pretty much just lose to the Sixers, and it would be Sixers versus either Nets or Bucks. And I predicted Bucks at the time. Looking back on it, even though it was technically right, I don't know that I would actually give myself full credit for that prediction, just because if the Nets are fully healthy, the Nets are the ones coming away with that series pretty, undoubtedly in my mind. So, but yeah, I mean, hats off to the Hawks. I don't know how you view it if you're a Hawks fan, because you can view it, wow, like we exceeded expectations so much this year, and let's come back next year and do the same thing. But when you look at it, it seemed like the Heat, they kind of thought the same thing off the bubble year. And I know it's, that was the bubble, but they kind of came back this year, and they weren't nearly as good as they thought they were going to be. And I don't want the same to happen to the Hawks. I don't want them to think they can't make any improvements in the offseason or in future off seasons. You still have to look at this team, because as of right now, like, Hawks fans can't fool yourself. Hawks GMs can't fool. Hawks front office, don't fool yourself. Like, you still need way more talent to be able to actually compete. And I know you made it to the conference finals, but it was pretty much because Ben Simmons choked the series. I mean, or, whoever else you want to blame on that, 76ers, Doc Rivers, among others. But yeah, the Hawks team is a super interesting one to me, because now we're really into this Trae Young versus Doncic thing. And that's actually been one of my favorite storylines, just, or comparisons at least, throughout the whole playoffs. Because before this playoffs, I mean, yeah, the comparison was there, but obviously 99.9% of people are with Doncic on that. And I still think the vast majority of people would take Doncic over Trae Young for, the next however many years. But it is going to be something interesting to look at, because I think there is a legitimate argument for Trae Young now at this point. I mean, I don't know that I would agree with it, or I'm probably not going to make it on this podcast, but there is a legitimate argument to take Trae Young over Doncic. I just got like super off the rails on that, but that's my.
Yeah, no, I mean, just I guess quickly on that, and then I'll touch on the Hawks kind of. But I mean, definitely you're taking Doncic. I mean, if you were to redraft that draft, you're still taking Luka. You would take Luka first, and you'd probably take Trae Young second, but you're definitely taking Luka first. And he's just, if he had a better team around him, then he's probably getting to the point where Young is at. I mean, you got to give credit to the Hawks front office for them getting a lot of talent this past offseason. Now they do have questions going to this one. John Collins, do you pay him a max contract? I don't know if I would, honestly. I just don't think he's worth that. So we'll see what they do. I honestly would not be. You could always sign and trade him, which is definitely a possibility, which I think would probably work out the best for them. But we'll see what actually happens with that. But I don't think they should give him a max contract to come back. I don't think he's that type of player. But I think some positives you have to look at is that Hunter was out for basically the whole playoffs, basically a lot of the year, honestly. But he was one of your better players when healthy. Obviously, he could really defend. I think he averaged 17 points per game this season. So you're only hoping he can get even better. And if he stays healthy, then that's rather a starter or your sixth man, probably a starter, honestly. Cam Reddish, who was injured, he, those last couple of games when Young was out, he came up big. Even just the last game, he had 21 points in 29 minutes. And he was the guy who was injured, again, basically the whole playoffs, I think the entire playoffs. So that's another piece coming back. So you have two young guys who you drafted in 2018, 2019, who can give you even more value to Young, and then Bogdanovich, Herter, Capella. I'm assuming you don't bring Collins back, but again, you have guys who can fill that spot. Gallinari is still going to be on your team. So I really do like their team next year. Now I do agree they're not gonna I don't think they'll get this far again unless it just works out in the seedings or whatever. But if they have to face a Nets or a Bucks, and I would assume the Sixers would be better, whether it's trade or just Simmons is better. I don't think they get past one of those three teams, but I definitely do like them for the future because again, this Nets team's not going to be around for a lot longer. The Sixers could always blow up. We don't really know what's going to happen with them. The Bucks will most likely still be here, but I definitely like them for the next 2 to 3 years, but probably just not next year. I think that they just don't have enough talent to get by one of those three teams again. I'd be surprised by that, but yeah, I definitely like their future though for sure.
I will say super quickly that the argument for Trae Young would be, I mean, just watching these playoffs, he's gotten his team, and I know his team's probably better, but it's not like his team's amazing. He got his team a couple rounds further than Doncic has ever gotten his team. Just getting a feel for the environment, I think Trae Young has proven so far that he's a better leader than Doncic, and he's less, I guess he just whines less. I know Doncic is kind of, it's been behind the scenes kind of with the Mavericks this offseason. We don't really know too much on the specifics, but I mean, Trae Young has just looked like he's complained less. He's been willing to just kind of work with what he's got. He hasn't been too fussy, and I mean, the mentality of him on the road is just amazing to me, especially at a young age. And it's refreshing. And I said this about a couple players in this league, but it's just refreshing compared to like, you know, a LeBron and especially like a KD, just like people that just are just not really just, I don't know, they just don't really embrace it like Trae Young did or does. So I think I mean, it's not on the court stuff that you make an argument for Trae Young, but I've heard people try to make the argument. So, but yeah.
Yeah, so that's it for the conference finals. We can move into the NBA finals. So like I was saying earlier, how I like the Bucks even without Giannis. And the reason is because they have Lopez who can match up with Aiton, and he can play. If the Suns ever wanted to go small, Lopez can still play, which is what the problem in the Clippers series was. Because the Clippers really could have won that series. I mean, those first two games, they could have won either of those games. Obviously, the second game, they probably should have won. So that series, they still could have won without Kawhi, but they always wanted to go small in that series, but you just couldn't because Aiton could always stay on the floor because even though he's 7 foot, he can still switch on smaller guys and he could still play in a small ball lineup. So that was the problem with the Clippers. So they always had to play Zubac, and they didn't want to play him. I think he played 40 minutes one game or like 35 minutes, which is just you don't want that in a series. But the Bucks can counter Aiton with Lopez, and they can go small with Portis at the 5, or when Giannis comes back, he could always play the 5. So I think that for that reason, I think it's one of the bigger reasons why you're looking more into the matchups that you'd like the Bucks honestly over the Suns, because again, you have Holiday who can guard Paul. For Booker, I mean, you could honestly put PJ Tucker on Booker because PJ Tucker's only 6'5". I think Booker's 6'5". So that matchup kind of does work. He can be more aggressive with him than other players probably have been. Pat Bev is too small to guard Booker. He was on Chris Paul too, but if you wanted to put him on Booker, he's too small for him. Even though he has that aggressive style, Tucker is just a bigger guy. He's more built, obviously. He's more mass. So I kind of like that matchup there. Middleton, I mean, who's really going to – I don't really see someone on the Suns, like, matching up with Middleton. I know Middleton's not the biggest – like, he's not going to, like, put up 30 every single game. But, he can definitely – he's shown in that Hawks series that if you don't really have someone to guard him, he can definitely create his own shot and make his own shot if he feels comfortable. So I just like the matchup between the Bucks against the Suns. And – I just think if Lopez plays big like he did at the end of that Hawks series, I think it's just gonna be tough for the Suns to overcome that. And I know it's saying like Brook Lopez, how do you look at Brook Lopez like that? But if he can really be consistent, if he can kind of do what Aiton's been doing in the West, and Lopez can do that in this series, now he's gonna have a challenge playing against Aiton, but I just really like that matchup, and I think that really favors the Bucks, even without Giannis. And when Giannis comes back, I think it's even more in their favor. So I'm just really leaning Bucks going into this.
My initial thoughts on who would win the series were pretty just, I didn't really know. I made a video on the Clips channel just saying why the Suns would probably not win the finals, but ever since that video, I just thinking more about it. I think narrative wise, it lines up for the Suns. Clearly, I don't even have to explain myself on that one. Injury wise, it lines up much better for the Suns. timeline wise, it's a better time for the Suns to win the finals. This is pretty much their only year where they have a realistic shot, or this is their best shot for sure. The Bucks have the next. I mean, they've got probably at least another 5 years at this thing, and the next 5 years is probably another year where they're in the finals and have a shot. This is Giannis. Giannis is 26. I mean, he's going to have so many more trips to the finals, or at least chances to get back there. The Suns also just have a lot of shooters. I think they're probably the more complete, just overall team. They have less. They probably have less just big holes. I mean, they have shooters, obviously with Crowder, and they great role players, and Chris Paul's there, and Devin Booker can pretty much shoot from anywhere. And obviously with Ayton, you're scared from three. You're super scared at mid range, obviously with Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and then you're scared around the basket. And it's just going to be tough for the Bucks to kind of fully shut down the Suns. I just think they're too complete of a team for them to kind of just shut them down offensively. And I don't know. I was leaning Bucks hard initially. The more and more I think about it, I kind of lean Suns. If Giannis can't come back and be healthy for games 3 and 4, I definitely think Suns win the series. But if you're making me make a prediction right now, I would pick Bucks in 7. I think Giannis can come back 75% for game 3. That might be a little bit hopeful, but if that happens, I think the Bucks win the series. I think they're able to come back. I think they lose game 1. I just with the way that the Bucks have kind of pretty much, I think they're 1-3 in game 1s, and I think the Suns are 3-0 in game 1s so far, or something like that. The Bucks have just not been good in game 1s. Chris Middleton's been not great in game 1s. They've been inconsistent, whereas the Suns have been pretty much the complete opposite in game 1s. So I like the Suns game 1 tonight. Game 2, I probably like the Suns as well. I mean, we might have an episode, or I might talk about it before game 2 actually happens. I probably like the Suns in game 2, but I think if Giannis comes back and he's 75%, Chris Middleton can be that closer guy, and Holiday can kind of play great perimeter defense and make threes and score the ball when needed when they need to relieve Giannis, since he's probably not going to be 100%. I like the Bucks this series, but it is going to be close. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going 6 or 7. These teams are just too close talent wise, probably, for it not to go 6 or 7 with or without Giannis, probably. So, yeah, that'd be my prediction.
So you think the Suns win the first 2 games and the Bucks can come back?
I do think that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of just going through the playoffs. The Suns are 3-0 in game 1s. The Bucks are 1-2. So I think that does definitely favor the Suns in game 1. And I think obviously, knowing there's going to be no Giannis, I think that plays somewhat of an effect. I think you could have just expected that anyways, that he wasn't going to play game 1. But there was definitely, I think they said if the Bucks went to game 7, that they would have played Giannis, which I don't know how healthy he would have been. He probably would have been like 50%, but they said that he probably could have played in a game 7, which would have technically been tonight for a Hawks game 7, or maybe it was last night. But he's obviously that was just because it was going to be a game 7. So obviously for game 1 of the finals, obviously you'd love to have him, but you're not going to push him to that limit. So, I think it definitely obviously favors the Suns that you just know there's going to be no Giannis. So you can kind of game plan a little bit differently. I know that's more of like an NFL thing and then an NBA thing. I think it matters more in the NFL than the NBA, but I think it still somewhat matters. But I kind of agree. I think Suns probably win game 1. I think it's probably, I think it's kind of similar to that Clippers game 1, where it seems like the Suns are in control the entire game, but the Clippers keep coming back and they making it close. And the Clippers definitely had a chance to win that first game in the Western Conference Finals, but the Suns just held out. So I think it's probably somewhat close to that. It's going to be a close game, but it's always going to be somewhat comfortable for the Suns. And I think game 2, the Bucks do win, though. I think, obviously the Suns are going to be the home team in this series. So that does help. Obviously you get game 7 in your place if there is a game 7, but I think the Bucks can steal one on the road, and that's all you can ask for. Just steal one. Obviously without Giannis, that even makes it more important to steal one. Because again, you assume he comes back for game 3 or game 4, which is going to be in your home court. So I think the series going into game 3 will be 1-1. I think we could talk about it more when we get to that point, because we'll see how the first 2 games play out. Maybe injuries happen again. That's always a possibility that there's going to be injuries. We've seen it throughout the entire playoffs, every single round. So hopefully there is no injuries. But again, the likelihood of it probably does happen. Hopefully just not to one of the star players. But I think it's going to be 1-1 after 2 games. You think it's going to be 2-0 Suns? You think Bucks come back rather than 6 or 7 games? I think, I mean, it's, you always want a finals to go 7 games, but I think it will go 7 games. If Giannis was healthy the entire uh, round, I think it's probably 6 games. But with him not being healthy, I think it's 7 games. So yeah, I Bucks in 7. You said Bucks in 7, or are you 6 or 7?
I'm 7. I'll be Bucks in 7. Uh, it's so tough because you almost think like, is Chris Paul really going to let this opportunity slip? If he doesn't win this finals, to me, he's never going to win a finals. This is, from, in my opinion, his last chance, his last real chance at a finals. Is he going to let this opportunity slip, his 16-year NBA career? If he doesn't win this finals, he'll be one of the best players to never win a finals, which, I mean, obviously is great, but he doesn't want to be a part of that conversation. He doesn't want to be with that Barkley and among many others as well. He doesn't want to be a part of that. He wants to be a guy who is known for the leadership, the playmaking, the ability to make others around him better. And he wants to back that up with a championship. I feel like if you, with that type of resume, to not have a championship to back that up with, it doesn't make it meaningless, but it makes it so much less significant than it really should be. It's just, if that's your style of play, to not have a championship to back it up, it's so tough to put him. It would be very tough to argue for him to be as high as he possibly could be in a top point guards of all time list. So
Yeah, especially when he's been on teams that have had real championship hopes. Those Clipper teams, obviously the Rocket teams. Now, again, the injuries play a part. His poor performances in some of those Clipper games, against the Thunder, against the Rockets when they blew the 3-1 lead. So he's had a lot of chances. He's blown a lot of chances. I agree with you. This is definitely his last real chance because the Suns are going to extend him. Obviously he has one more year on his contract, but they're going to extend him, whether it's after this season or obviously sometime next season before his contract runs out. So
it's a player option this year. So I think he probably would decline it. I think it's like a $41 million player option. I think he declines it. And then, I mean, the Suns probably sign him to a 3-year, $100 million year contract, or maybe even a 4-year, $120 million contract.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the contract would be, he's obviously going to stay with the Suns for a max contract. I think we can all agree with that. So, and I think we can also agree that, he's 36 years old. He hasn't got injured the last 2 years, which is very surprising. So I think we can kind of expect him to get injured possibly in the next 2 to 3 years. And I just don't think this team is good enough to get to another NBA Finals, especially when a healthy Lakers, a healthy Clippers, Kawhi is most likely going to stay. The Nuggets with Jamal Murray, team, the Jazz are always going to be there. It's always a tough series, I guess, going against the Jazz. So there's going to be teams that are there. The Warriors are obviously going to be back. So I think this is definitely their best shot at getting to a finals. I mean, obviously they're in one, but the next 2 to 3 years, I think it's just going to be tough because the Lakers are going to go all out to get to another finals because LeBron's going to be done in 3 years. It just he has to be. The Warriors, again, their timeline is still there, but it's somewhat closing. The Jazz are there, but what's Mitchell going to do? If he doesn't get past the second round. Obviously the Clippers, seems like Kawhi's going to stay, but if can him and George really get back to this point again? So, it's like there's just a lot of teams that are going to be in that Western Conference, and this is definitely their best shot. So he really does have to win one, but I just, I've kind of been doubting him, and we both have, but I just don't think he can beat the Bucks. I just don't. And I I just think if Holiday has a really good series, I think it's gonna be tough for Paul to really shine and have an amazing series.
Would So you would sign, if you're the Suns, you would sign Chris Paul to a, we'll just call it 3-year, $100 million extension this offseason?
Well, I think you have to because if you go back to what you were before Paul with like Ricky Rubio as your point guard or just like any other point guard, the team doesn't work. And I know that you look at the positives and be like, we can somewhat reach this level again. Booker and Ayton are just way better with Paul. But then you look at the negatives and that he's 36. He's clearly going to be declining. If another injury happens, he'll start really declining. It's going to be a lot of money for those last, like 2 years or last year where he's just probably not even going to, who even knows what he's going to be at that point. So there's negatives, there's positives, but I think you just have to do it. You reach an NBA finals with him. I think it's just something you have to do. And if you didn't do it, your fans would just kill you. I mean, how could you not re-sign the guy who brought you to an NBA finals? So I think there's just like a PR aspect, there's a player aspect, team aspect. I think there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think you just have to do it if you're the Suns.
I would agree with that. Although I wouldn't want to if I was the Suns, if I was James Jones, I wouldn't want to, regardless of what happens in this final series. He's going to want 3 years, or maybe, the Suns can give him 4. So he'll want 3 or 4 years. That somebody, I think, whether maybe it's the Knicks, maybe it's somebody, but somebody would pay Chris Paul 2 or 3 years, probably 3. So they're going to have to sign him. I wouldn't. And maybe you would if you consider the fact that players would want to just be traded from the team because, the Suns just show that they aren't loyal to people who bring them places, I guess. Kind of what happened to like the Celtics and Isaiah Thomas type of thing, where it's like players lose faith in the Celtics front office because they were just kind of scummy to their players. But just basketball wise, the Suns aren't winning a championship with Chris Paul on this team, I don't think. Assuming the Suns team is close to what it is talent wise now, unless DeAndre Ayton develops even more than he already has, and Devin Booker would have to take another step forward to be like a true 1A or 1B, which I guess he kind of is now, but he'd have to be even better. He'd have to be another step better. He'd have to be a guy that we look at and say, all right, well, he's a guy that can probably win a championship, maybe even by himself. He'd have to be that good, in my opinion, to bring a Suns team with Chris Paul back to the finals, with teams being somewhat healthy. So I don't know, just basketball wise, it's a tough argument to make, in my opinion. And I know all the things you said are completely right, and I have no doubt in my mind that I'm assuming they will sign Chris Paul to an extension if he declines his player option, and if he accepts it, that's even better for the Suns. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's just two ways. Like I kind of look through it, and one way is that if you don't re-sign him, then Booker. There's always the potential that Booker's just going to want to ask out, like you were saying. Like he probably would want to ask for a trade out, especially like let's say he declines the player option. They don't sign him. The rumors that the Knicks would sign him if he becomes a free agent. The Knicks would sign him. That'd be the team to sign him. So let's say you lose Paul. You go a year without him, you're probably not that good. You probably still make the playoffs, but you're probably just not as good anymore. Booker would definitely the potential for him to ask out on a trade, especially because of the year that they're having this year with Paul, to not to have him. So you could always lose Booker if you don't have Paul. So you lose Paul and Booker. That means you only have Ayton. Yes, you get back what you get for Booker, but it's not going to be as good as Devin Booker, obviously. So that's bad. That's obviously a negative. Another one is that their owner has been historically cheap. He hasn't really paid for a lot of guys that he probably should have. So if he does pay for Paul, that's max money. It's already max money for Booker. He's gonna have to pay max money for Ayton. So that's gonna be 3 max contracts. I don't know if the owner is willing to do that because he's just a guy who's been historically cheap. So that's another way to look at it. Also, that they may just not do it because they know they're gonna have to pay Ayton. Obviously, they're paying Booker. Then you may have to treat whatever you gotta do with Paul at an aging guy like that. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, and I just think I do agree with you that like I wouldn't do it. Like I wouldn't do it. Like I don't want to do it, but it's just something you have to do. And that's what a lot of contracts are though. It's like you don't really want to pay for this guy. You don't really want to trade this much for that guy, but you just kind of have to do it because you just know he's going to make your team better than what the alternative would be. So I think that's a situation that's at play, but I think a lot does rely on the owner. And if he's willing to pay 3 max contracts, one for a guy who's emerging, one a guy who's almost a superstar. He's like a all-star guy, and then a guy who's obviously past his prime. I think we can all agree on that, but he's kind of fading a little bit. Obviously, when you pay him that money, he's going to be fading at the end of those 3 years. So a lot of questions for the Suns, even if they win or lose. But it will be a good finals, though. I mean, for sure. I think it will definitely be a good finals.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just crazy to look back at just 2 years ago. Chris Paul was pretty much viewed as like a negative asset. He was almost like Kemba Walker's viewed now, where, you had to take salary and take money and take bad contract just to get rid of Kemba Walker. And it's going to be similar with, it was similar with Chris Paul. I mean, he was pretty much viewed as a negative asset, and he carried the Oklahoma City Thunder to a playoffs. And now obviously he's got the Suns here in the finals. And I almost kind of look back at the Rockets team and say, did they blow it up too early? And I know the locker room itself was just, they weren't having it. It didn't seem like the locker room was going to make it through another year. But if you just eliminate that and you somehow could time travel and tell Chris Paul and James Harden and the Rockets that this could make it further and you guys could actually win a finals, even though it hasn't worked out yet. I mean, I feel like that team could still be a really solid team today. I mean, looking at how good Chris Paul's been and now he hasn't been injured, and obviously James Harden, seeing how he can adapt his game on the Nets. I mean, he could even change his game more so with around Chris Paul and on that Rockets team, the more chemistry they get together, and who knows what they would have around them. So I don't know who the head coach would be. Maybe it's D'Antoni, maybe it's somebody else, but it is interesting to look back on that Rockets team because you got nothing for him. You got nothing for Chris Paul pretty much, and you got nothing for Harden, really. You realistically got nothing compared to what they're doing now. So it's just interesting because that team could have probably won an NBA Finals.
Yeah, and the only, I guess, counter I'd say is that Harden probably just wouldn't have changed his game, even though he obviously should have been doing that since like he couldn't have done that in 2015, 2016, 2017 before they got Paul, and then obviously, like when it was just Harden, he should have changed his game when they got Paul because I think they probably should have won a championship. I mean, obviously you had to play the Warriors and stuff, but again, they had him down 3-2. So if he changed his game then, I think they definitely win a championship. I think it's way different, today than what it was then. But I just don't know if he would have changed his game, honestly, because that was the whole thing. Paul wanted him to change his game. He wanted to do something when he was off the ball. He wanted Harden to like move, and he just never did. He would just stand in the corner. So, obviously, if he was like playing with the Nets, like how he's playing with the Nets now, like he was, 3 years ago with the Rockets, I think they definitely win a championship. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Yeah, and I did just make that argument, but just to think even more, I mean, what I was thinking about earlier was kind of how Chris Paul is similar to Jimmy Butler in a way. It's just like if they're the guy on their team, they're a great leader, and they look a guy who could, just has that great mentality and is able to make everybody around them better. But we've kind of seen when Chris Paul and Jimmy Butler aren't the guys on their team and they have another veteran leadership type guy around them who's either just as good or close to as good or better, stuff kind of gets a little bit weird. I mean, and the Rockets locker room would be one thing for Chris Paul, and I kind of would say that's kind of equivalent to Jimmy Butler and the Sixers in that locker room, or Jimmy Butler in Minnesota's locker room. Who do you blame that on? Would you blame that on Jimmy Butler / Chris Paul? I mean, would you blame Chris Paul for the Rockets blowing up? I'm not sure, but when we've kind of seen when Chris Paul's has some conflict in the locker room with other leaders, whether they be, I guess, veterans or young guys or coaches, even going back to the Clippers days too, stuff hasn't really worked out. And I guess it's not necessarily a shot at Chris Paul and I guess Jimmy Butler, but it's just something to note that the times when Chris Paul has looked best is when he almost has the least around him, is when he has the least around him.
Yeah, I think having younger guys who are more willing to follow him, I think are definitely better. Go to the Clippers and they were younger, but it was kind of like Blake was, I mean, at that point before the injuries, he kind of was emerging as like the better player on that team.
Doc Rivers had a voice of his own too. He wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily like a Monty Williams, I would say.
Yeah, and also it does help that Monty did coach Paul when he was basically, he was a rookie the first couple of years, so they have that relationship. I don't think Paul and Rivers ever had the relationship, before they started playing. So that obviously helped. Having guys like a Booker and Ayton. Ayton was a guy who he was still finding himself, and he's turned himself now into like an all-star player. Booker was an all-star player, but it was good stats, bad team guy, so he was willing to do that. Harden is a guy who won MVP, been in playoffs, had success. So he's like, I can kind of just keep doing this and it's most likely going to work even if you're here. So I think that's the difference. But again, I think we definitely agree that, him on like a team with like a star, it's kind of like coaches. Like some coaches just work better with teams that are younger and don't have like an attitude. And then, that same coach just doesn't work with a team that has like a star player. It's weird how it works, but I think Paul's kind of like that. He's better with teams that are younger than teams that are more, veteran and more kind of star, ego-y, I would say.
If the Suns didn't win this finals, you could potentially make the argument on Chris Paul that yes, he was a great leader, but he was only really able to be a leader when teams were willing to follow him. And the teams that were willing to follow him didn't have enough talent to legitimately win a finals, especially if they're not going to win it this year. And when a team does have enough talent to win a finals, he butts heads with those players and it doesn't work out. that would be a shot on his legacy to me, at least. He would have to lose his finals for it to really be a legitimate argument. And I think that's an argument I'd be willing to make for Jimmy Butler if he doesn't win a finals as well. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was all that we had before the first game of the finals, which again, like we said, is tonight. So you pick Suns, I pick Suns. So I mean, I guess we'll see what
Bucks.
happens. But
But
well, no, I'm saying in game one.
oh, sorry, you're right.
Yeah, we both picked Bucks for the series, both in 7 games. But for game one, we both picked the Suns. For game two, you picked Suns, I picked Bucks. I'm assuming that the next time we probably meet will be after game two. We may just even keep doing that, honestly, unless it gets to an elimination game. Then we'll probably do it before every single game. But yeah, we'll probably be back after game two, which should be after Thursday. That's when, yeah, Thursday is game two. Sunday is game three. So rather Friday or Saturday, or maybe even Sunday before the game is the next time we'll meet. So I guess any last thoughts before the first game of the finals?
Not really. It's going to be interesting to see how the storylines play out. There's a lot of storylines this year. For Bucks fans and Suns fans, take it in, because I don't think you're going to be back next year or the year after that. Probably Bucks fans is more realistic than Suns fans, but Suns fans, I mean, for real, I mean, you guys probably know that this is, a once in a lifetime opportunity. So, but yeah, yeah. No, I don't really have any more thoughts other than that, though.
Yeah. So, like I said, we'll be back after game two. So rather Friday, Saturday, maybe even Sunday. Yeah. So that's about it. Thanks for
Goodbye.
watching.
Yep.